Good morning, ladies. Thank you for joining us today on Facebook Live, or if you're joining us by email, thank you for joining us by email. We're excited about this Bible study. If you're on Facebook Live, make sure that you just say hi so we know you're there, or make a comment. And if you're on email, do the same thing. We want to hear from you so we know what's going on and what you're learning from God during this time of isolation. This study on the meaning of life has really enriched me. I've learned things that I never thought about before. Today, we're going to talk about laboring in love daily, and what that means in our daily practice. We talked about the first week, loneliness, where Catherine and Kathy shared what their take was on loneliness and how God had worked in their lives through that. And then last week we talked about Paula and Vicki led us to talk about loss and how the many moves they had gone through had created great loss in their life, but there had also been gains. And then there was the loss of loved ones that we talked about also. And as we get into our talk today about labor, the first thing I think about always is laboring in childbirth. But that is not what we are talking about. Even though that is a labor in love, that is not what we're talking about today, thankfully. There's two things that Jen says in these Bible studies that I've so enjoyed. The first one is she said, God is the first homemaker. And that has just meant so much to me to have it expressed that way. And then the thing she said this week was, let's join God in his housekeeping. And I thought that was an interesting way to put it. That's a new spin on both of those words. So how do we join God in his housekeeping? What is it that he does in housekeeping that makes us want to join him? First, I think, and first and foremost, I believe that it has to do with the family of God. It has to do with having a place, a church, which he created, that accepts people unconditionally. The love is unconditional. It's a safe place where people can come together to worship, to be together, to fellowship, to just have community. And I think that that's what God is talking about when he's talking about doing his housekeeping. I think that's what this means. I've had the privilege of being in church my entire life. I know everybody doesn't come with this, but this is my testimony. And as sad as it makes me that it's not everybody's testimony, it was mine. I was in church from the time I was in my mother's womb. And to my knowledge, we've been in church our entire life and active in a church. My parents came from church homes that were active, and when they grew up and had their own lives and then had us, they carried on that legacy. Mother and Daddy had 3 girls, and we were stair steps. So when it came to Sunday, Mother would just lay out our clothes on the couch, and there were 3 dresses laying there. Daddy would be in charge of getting us dressed down to our shoes and socks, and then he'd send us to Mother to take care of tying the bows and fixing our hair. Something that's a little different from today, because we don't do as much of all of that, the dressy dresses and stuff like that, but that's the way it was when we were growing up. She would also lay out our envelopes with the money in it that we would put in the offering plate. So we grew from a young age knowing that that was important also. And then as we grew older, we went to church in a different place. We went to boys camp every year for 3 months, from the time I was about 11 through my teen years. My father was the camp director, and that's where we spent our summers, in a boys camp with about 200 different boys every 2 weeks. Every Sunday, I tell you this because every Sunday we climbed a hill and we sat on benches and we had a church service. Someone would be preaching. It may be my father, it may have been somebody else, and then the counselors would be playing their guitars, and that would be our music. And we would worship in this church without walls. What was interesting about that, and what I find fascinating even to this day, is that there were a lot of animals that joined us in our church service. There were rabbits, lizards, there were deer, there were horses, so many birds out there singing, and it was like they wanted to be a part of that. It reminds me of that verse that says, if we don't testify, the rocks will cry out. And it was like they wanted to be a part of worship. And I just think that's fascinating. I watch my turtles today, and so many times they're just lifting their heads up to the sky. And I think they are just worshiping in their way. And I just think that's fascinating about animals and how God's created them to give him praise even if we don't. So that was another take on our church and how we grew up in church. And then we would go back to our home church, and we would go ahead and do things at our home church, whether it be in youth choir, children's choir, or whatever. And we would also have wonderful teachers, Vacation Bible School. Our lives were filled with church, and if the church doors were open, we were there, because that's how I was raised. Well, when I about 15 years old, I was diagnosed with an illness, and it was not a pretty illness. Of course, I don't guess any illness is pretty, but this one has some outward complications that people see, and it was not pretty. And you know, nothing is worse than finding out you have something, or that it's negative. You find out anything negative when you're a teenager, because you think all eyes are on you, which is not true, but that's how you feel. And at this time, I felt very alone. I wanted to isolate myself. I didn't see how I could ever be of use. I didn't see how God could use me in any way. I didn't see how I could be in the public at all. And yet, we were active in church. So, of course, we went to church. And you know what? My church family rallied around me. They loved on me. And they made me feel like everything was okay. There was one lady that was really special in my life. And every Sunday, or every time we were there, she would walk up to me and she would say, kiss me on both cheeks. And she would say, Vicki, you are special. God's got a plan for you. Every Sunday that would happen. And then later on in my life, she moved they came to the Met, and she did that every time she saw me. She would come up and she would kiss me on both cheeks, and she would say, Vicki, you are special. God's working out his plan in your life. She's since gone home to be with the Lord, and I know that it's a wonderful place up there right now, because she's up there and with her husband and many loved ones, and she's so blessed so many people. Moving on in my church life, Bobby came to my church when I was about 12, and we went to church the rest of our lives together. And then when we were young, we got married. When I was 18, we got married, and we moved to Corpus. He was in the service, and so we moved to Corpus, and that, are you kidding me? And that is where, as I think about it, I'm laughing, and I said, are you kidding me? Because I was trying to think of the age, but no, that's right. We moved to Corpus, and we had to find a church home. It had to be a place that we wanted to be welcome and loved, and that we could also contribute. Well, so we found a wonderful church home. It was made up of seniors that were retired and singles that were in the military, and we were the only married couple. Well, we had our son Wade while we were there, and he was the only child in that church. So if he had a fussy Sunday, one of the elderly women would come get him and take him to the nursery and rock him, because they wanted to use the nursery so bad, and we were the only ones with the child. And so that, again, those were precious memories to us. We had sweet fellowship with those people, a lot of get-togethers. And so when we got out of the service, we had to leave that church, and it was so hard. That was probably one of the hardest things about leaving Corpus. Well, we came back to Houston, and we decided it was time for us to go back to our church that we grew up in, but to find a church for us. And so we looked for a church, and we found the Met. And we've been at the Met for 43 years. Our children grew up here at the Met. Stephanie was a year old when we came here, and Wade was 2.5. They grew up doing everything that you can possibly do in a church, good and bad, I'm afraid, because church was so much home. They loved the church choir. They loved to sing in the children's choir and then in the youth choir, and they loved their classes. They enjoyed having fellowships and retreats with the young people, and they had some good leaders, some people that loved them and took care of them during all these years. Well, they've since grown up and become adults, and so that's another part of our lives that have ended because now they're grown adults. Well, Bobby and I had the privilege of serving this church for all these years. When we first came, we were young adults, and there were many older adults that mentored us and loved us and taught us the scriptures, and we were fortunate to have this. And as we grew older, we began to serve more. Bobby served for 30 years in the child care area. He walked the buggy, the bye-bye buggy, and he would, any baby that was crying, they would take it to Bobby, because they knew that Bobby could settle down. In many circles, he was called the baby whisperer because he could take that baby and just love on it, rock it in his arms or rock it in that rocking chair, and that baby would go to sleep or settle down, and they wouldn't have to call the moms and dads. So he served many years there until he got to a point where he couldn't do that anymore. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to serve in ladies' ministry for many years. I've also been able to teach a ladies' class and on Sunday morning, and I have so enjoyed that. I've been a part of a small group. I have learned from so many people, and I just can't tell you what the church has meant to us. They have been there for us during loss of jobs, during illnesses, during times of rejoicing and praise, as we shared exciting news with people at the church. We've fellowshipped with people. We've had adults that we have had dinner with after church, that we would all get together from our class and just fellowship and do birthday parties. This has been our home away from home. This has been our community, and we have felt so loved and accepted in the church, and I hope that we have also loved and accepted other people. Well, a few years ago, I got cancer, and I had to have many surgeries, and once again, the women of the church just came around us and loved on us. They took Bobby and Wade meals 2 or 3 times a week, and they sent me little notes, cards. They also text me. They sent pictures of themselves saying, "We miss you." They would send me a Bible verse, as I had to stay with my family and Katie to be taken care of. It was, once again, a wonderful time where the church took care of us. Then last year, my husband went home to be with Jesus, very unexpectedly. And within 30 minutes of this happening, there were people from the church that came and were there for us. They helped my daughter and my son and I by just being there, by just loving on us, just helping us through this very, very difficult time. And then when we had a celebration service, once again, the church rallied around us. They fed our friends and family. And I don't know where I would be without the church. The church has just meant so much to my family. Well, my son-in-law said something to my daughter after Bobby died, and he said, "Steph, I think it's time your mom come live with us." And Stephanie looked at him and she said, "Mike, she's not coming to live with us." That's her home. But more than that, that's her church home. And she loves them, and she will not leave that church home unless she's just dragged away. And that's the truth. That's how I feel. I love this church. It's family to me. It's where my community is, and it's where I know I'm accepted and loved, and it's where I hope that I have shown that same thing to others. Well, I never had quite understood a verse in the Bible, and Jen explained it this week. It's Luke 8:19 through 21, and I'm going to paraphrase part of it. It says that Jesus was ministering to the crowds, and he was preaching and teaching, and someone came to him, and he said, Jesus, your mom and your brothers are outside, and they want to see you. And then Jesus said, my mother and brothers are those who, well, let me read it because I will probably mess it up, and I want you to understand what it says exactly. It says, my mothers and brothers are those who hear God's word and put it into practice. Well, when I heard that the first time, when I read that the first time, I thought, well, Jesus is kind of disrespecting his mama. Well, and I knew Jesus wouldn't do that. And then Jen explained something this week, and I love the way she said it because it was exactly what it meant. And I'm going to read that too. She said that Jesus had expanded his definition of family, and that it wasn't always about blood family. I thought that is exactly true. And that is why when my son-in-law said that to Stephanie, that is why she could say, Mike, she's not going to move here because that's her family. God has expanded his definition of family. And I'm so glad to be a part of the family of God and have brothers and sisters from all over the world that are my brothers and sisters in Christ. And I thank God every day for expanding my family. That means so much to me. Well, there's just a couple more things I want to share with you. One is about Joseph, and Jen talked about him this week. And I love her illustration of Joseph when she called the places that Joseph took care of houses, and how the language that we don't quite get meant that each place was a house, maybe even a home. And she talked about this, but what she said was that the people that owned those homes did not have to worry because they trusted Joseph with everything in their home, with taking care of everything. And that reminds me of what God's done. He's entrusted us with the family of God, with the community. He's entrusted us to show safety, unconditional love, acceptance in the family of God. But more than that, I think he's entrusted us with the world, because he has reached out to the world, and through us, he has put the Holy Spirit in us, and he gives us the gospel to share with the world. So he's entrusted us to share the gospel message with the entire world. That is what we're here for. That just hit me like I cannot tell you, to know that just like Joseph, God has entrusted us with the church and with the world. I'm going to end with this last thing that Jen said because it meant so much to me, and I hope that it means something to you. She talked about how we all have home in the family of God, whether we're divorced, whether we're married, whether we're single, or whether we're widowed. We have home in the family of God because that is our community, and we never need to forget that we can join in the family of God, be a part of it, share what we have learned, let people know us, get to know other people, accept everybody in the family of God. There is a place for us in the family of God. So go be a part of the family of God. Go invite others. Now, in this time of isolation, I want to say one more thing. Don't feed into your fears, but feed into your faith. Take time to stay connected, whether it be through online services, or whether it be through Zoom, which I've learned to do, or FaceTime, which I'm learning to do, or whether it be through talking on the phone, something we don't do much anymore, or texting, sending cards. Stay connected with people. Don't isolate yourself, even though it is a time of isolation. If you need to, just grab a lawn chair, call somebody up and say, hey, I'm coming over. We can social distance 6 feet apart. I'll bring my mask if I need to, or maybe I'll bring a cold drink and we'll just sit out here and visit. We can still do that. So enjoy this time, even though it's a new normal for us. Don't think it's a punishment from God, and don't think that it's a hard time, but enjoy it. Find a different way to make this your new normal. Well, I know this is going to end soon, so I will see you soon. I know God's going to do a mighty work through this, and I will see you soon. I know that to be truth. Bye. See you later.